So welcome to the White Rabbit. It's been a while, Alper, since you and I have done an episode with just the two of us, hasn't it?
It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
It seems like I spent a lot of time on airplanes where I couldn't join the recording.
Yeah, and it's been a long time since the two of us have recorded an episode. I feel kind of rusty. Yeah, so okay, so let's give it a shot anyway. So what we want to do today is that over the past couple months, we've had a variety of guests on the show, and we wanted to pick out some of the themes that they touched on in the conversations, and we wanted to give our own thoughts on that and dive into things a little bit deeper. So I've got one thing in particular in mind. So, who should go first, Alper? Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So the comment that's been sticking in my mind recently is we did an episode a while back, I think it was about a month ago, with Shebnem Dagguven. And she mentioned briefly that the storytelling skill gets drilled out of us in school and in the early work years. And then she quickly moved on because, we were talking about something else at the time. So she quickly moved on from that topic. But since then, I've been thinking about that. It's like, why is this skill drilled out of us? And so I've been thinking about that a lot recently. Do you mind if I dig into that a little bit?
I would love to hear that, actually.
Okay. And by the way, related to the show, I won't turn this into a television critique, but there's a show that I've been binge watching recently called Severance. It's on Apple TV, and it's about this very topic, the topic between the separation between work life and private life, between who you are at work and who you are in your outside of work life.
Okay.
So I've got that on the mind a lot lately, both in terms of watching television and also thinking about podcast episodes. So anyway, so what Shebnem said was that, this skill is drilled out of us in the early work life, or the school years and the early work life.
Along with 1,900 other skills, probably.
Yeah. And this is a natural skill that we humans naturally have. When you look at any child who hasn't really gone too far in the schooling system yet, you can see that skill in them. So it's very much a natural human skill. It's just that for some reason it gets drilled out of us. And I don't know, I'll get to a possible explanation as to why in a few moments. But one thing that I wanted to mention was that this separation, this isn't a storytelling thing, but it's related kind of tangentially. The separation between, how rational we like to flatter ourselves and think that we are at work, and how crazy and irrational we actually are. And,
I was just reading a book about that this morning.
Yeah. What's the name of the book, by the way?
Well, when I disclose it, I think we are going to roll a lot of eyes and maybe pivot this podcast in a completely new direction. Let's just call it. It was about spirits and angels and dreams.
Okay. Wow.
Not angels. Sorry. Angels didn't make an appearance. It was about our spiritual world and the connection with dreams. Okay. It was pretty Jungian, actually. It had nothing to do.
Yeah, it sounds pretty. It could go either way. It could be either deep and psychological, or it could be highly new agey.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll find out later which one. Okay, so. Okay. But anyway, one of my favorite examples of this is from the investment world. And over the years, I've done a lot of work with people in the investment world and in the asset management world. And there's this idea that an actively managed fund with, some person, a man or a woman, some person who actively picks stocks and puts them in a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
You've got that on the one hand, and then you've got a passively managed fund, like a Vanguard index fund, like in the U.S. it would be the S&P 500, or here in Turkey it would be like the BIST 100, the
Mm-hmm.
Borsa, the Istanbul Stock Exchange 100. So anyway, and the idea is that if you take the actively managed fund minus fees and compare it to the index fund minus fees, often the actively managed fund will underperform the index fund after you take out the fees. And yet people still invest in the actively managed fund, or tend to favor the actively managed fund. And I think there's no better example of irrationality, because you think, money and numbers and managing assets, it should be a very rational thing. But you've got a large number of people making a completely irrational decision, which is to pay more to have somebody underperform.
I wonder what they're buying there, at least psychologically or maybe internally.
Yeah, it's like, on the one hand, you think, or you like to tell yourself, you like to fool yourself into believing that what you're buying is financial expertise or, better money management or something like that. But actually what you're buying is the ability to call up a human and say, hey, what's going on with my fund? So it's what you're buying is the ability to connect with another human being. And we're paying a price for that. We pay money so that we can connect to somebody. Anyway, so where was I?
That's an interesting point, actually. I was thinking maybe since I'm paying the fees, maybe I want to have someone actively working on the other side, taking care of my interests, watching out for them. I don't know how realistic, of course, that is. Of course, I don't think there's another person dedicating 8 hours of his or her working time just to you. But I think there's a transaction going there. And I think it's closely related to the idea of reaching a human being at the end of the day.
Yeah, so we've got this great example of how people are making decisions which are not necessarily rational.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got an entire society, like, the human society, telling ourselves that when we walk into work, we are somehow more rational. But even in like some process that is designed to be as rational as possible, like an RFP process, theoretically, you think an RFP is going to remove emotions from the purchasing process, and everything's going to be documented and prices are going to be negotiated. But even the RFP process is not that rational. I mean, you've got, forget all the irrationality that might be going on in the purchasing world. Let's say that the buyer, the end buyer, starts out with like 7 candidates that might be good for this RFP process. So anyway, so the buyer sends over the RFP with the 7 candidates to the purchasing department. And the purchasing department works its magic. And here I'm going to pretend that they're being completely rational. In reality, they're probably not. But hey, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and let's say that they're being completely rational. So they take this list of 7 and they work their magic and they negotiate the prices, blah, blah, blah. And they send back to the buyer a short list of 3. It's like, of your original 7, here are the 3 who have made it through all of our filters so far. Pick one of these 3 and let's go with one of these 3. And so now, even though, theoretically, benefit of the doubt, the purchasing department was being completely rational. Now the ultimate buying decision is not rational at all. It's like, Okay, I've got this list of 3. I'm sitting at my desk. I'm trying to decide which of these 3 to use. And one of the big factors in me making my decision is going to be who's not going to mess up my life. Yeah.
Or who's going to mess it up the least?
Who's going to mess? Yeah, who's going to mess it up the least? Okay, so and it's not a rational decision at all. And so even with in the investment world, and then even in the RFP process, there's tons of irrationality going on there. So we're not nearly as rational as we like to think we are. So I was wondering over the past couple weeks, like, why is this? And I don't know how much stock to put into this. I don't know how airtight an explanation is. You tell me what you think. But one possible explanation came from another guest, Salim Selvarolu, who I interviewed, a couple weeks ago. And I put a question like this to him. And his answer was kind of interesting. His answer was that basically the brain is a cognitive miser. And that's not his or my phrase. It's somebody else's phrase. I forget who at the moment. But basically, the human brain makes up 2% of the human body weight. And yet it consumes 20% of the resources. So the human brain is basically a resource
That's from
hog.
John Medina. Is that what you were trying to remember?
Wait. Yeah, is that John Medina? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He shows up everywhere.
I use that a lot in the trainings, actually.
Yeah. So the brain is a cognitive miser, and the brain is getting this huge food bill, basically resource bill, from Mother Nature each month, and the human brain is trying to cut down on this bill in every way possible, and so it's taken as many shortcuts as it can. And one of the shortcuts that it is taking, and this is kind of where Salim's comment kind of made me go off in this direction. One of the ideas is that the human brain, it's easier for the human brain to make a logical decision or a decision that it thinks is logical, or that we convince ourselves is logical. The decision that we convince ourselves is logical is actually the brain taking shortcuts and telling us this is the best one. And I don't know how well I articulated that, or even if that makes any sense at all. So you tell me, does what I said just make any sense at all?
It does, but I want to repeat it to make sure that I understand it correctly.
Sure, go for it.
I love the analogy of the brain having to pay this huge bill at the end of the day, by the way. And I love the idea of it making every shortcut possible to this decisive shortcut, let's say decision-making shortcut possible to reduce that bill. What I want to confirm is, in that regard, the brain is making logical decisions, or is it actually somewhere else, let's say our gut making the decision, and is the brain justifying that decision by logic and saying that, yeah, this is the rational way to go, although it is 100% maybe a little bit supported by other things rather than the brain?
Oh, good question. Okay, so let's take the RFP process and work through it that way. Okay, so the RFP process, I think it's or I like to fool myself into thinking that it is a logical process. But in the end, it's just me at my desk, looking at my short list of 3, thinking who's going to make my life the least hellish. So, and at the end, or when I've made that decision, I and the company get to tell ourselves that, oh, wow, this decision was rational. But in the end, it wasn't really. So I would go with, we are fooling ourselves into thinking it's logical when actually it's not. And so the brain is taking shortcuts that are not necessarily logical And yet we're fooling ourselves and telling ourselves that, yes, they are in fact logical.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that?
Well, there is absolutely some serious fooling ourselves going on, because so many times, especially in large behemoth corporations, I look at some of the decisions taken, and I'm part of of course, I'm not part of their board, but in the presentations, I'm part of their decision-making process. And I'm like, how on earth did you come to this conclusion? And you have like a team of brainiacs running this company, and what happened? And I see this especially in the presentations in big organizations. Like, it's a huge amount of money spent, it's a huge amount of time and resources spent, and then the results are so disastrous that it makes you question, how were these decisions made?
And I was also thinking about this subject. I was thinking that, okay, well, because what you're describing here, this fooling ourselves into thinking that we're being more rational than we really are, if there isn't some good reason for it to be around, why has it not been arbitraged away? Why has someone not said this, 50 years ago? Why didn't somebody say, this is a problem, this is stupid, we're being stupid, I'm going to start being smart? And then all of a sudden, you got lots of copycats, and pretty soon everybody's being smart, and this doesn't exist anymore, but it still exists. So there must be a good reason for it to sit around. There must be a good reason for it to still be around here. And so I started asking myself, why is it still around? And I don't know, you tell me what you think of this, but I kind of come back to the same explanation, is that it's still around because it is, for the brain or for the human body, it is economically efficient. It's like, okay, this process might be logically, logically full of holes. I was trying to think of a more diplomatic phrase to use, but I'm not going to use a more diplomatic phrase. So this process might be logically full of holes, but it gives us a pretty good decision 90% of the time, and the cost of cleaning up the other 10%, it's not that high. So, we'll accept the less than optimum solution because we can pay for the 10% that being perfect and not fooling ourselves would save us. Does that make any sense?
It does. I also think there might be a couple of things going on simultaneously, and one of them would be this belief that we have, well, any action is better than no action. So maybe we are compelled to take an action. Maybe we are compelled to make a decision. I kind of agree with that. But of course, sometimes it can end up with disastrous results. At the same time, maybe we think more highly of ourselves than we actually are. I mean, maybe we overestimate our capacity in deciding, yes, this is the right way to go. It's definitely the right way to go. And then when it turns out that, no, it wasn't the right way to go, maybe our fear of making mistake kicks in, and our brain starts functioning to come up with all these recovery scenarios, let's say, as to why that was not a mistake. So it's obvious that it was a mistake, but it's difficult to accept. So we come up with all sorts of explanations.
So what you're saying, let me see if I'm following you correctly. So what you're saying is that we're fooling ourselves, but when we try to explain why we're fooling ourselves. All right. So
I wouldn't say we're trying to explain.
So
I wouldn't say we're trying to explain why we're fooling ourselves, but from a big perspective, yes. Let's say I made a decision. I was fooling myself into thinking that was rational, that was a pragmatic and logical way to go.
Okay.
But in the end, it wasn't. I mean, 6 billion people on the planet look at it and they say, no, it wasn't the right decision. But it's not very easy for me to accept that. So maybe I'm now coming up with stories that I tell myself as to why that was the right decision, and it's difficult to accept that I made a mistake. And maybe it's difficult for me to accept that the level I thought highly of myself is not accurate.
Uh-huh. Huh.
That's a lot of, that is a lot of things to face, to come to terms with. And maybe my emotional brain is not equipped to deal with that.
Yeah.
So it's coming up with all sorts of other reasons.
If we've built our entire society on the idea that when we walk through those glass doors in the morning, when we walk through the doors into work, if we've or if we've convinced ourselves that somehow when we walk into work each morning, we're being more rational than we really are, changing that way of seeing ourselves or changing that way of making the world work would be tremendously expensive. Okay, so here's one final thought before we wrap up this subject, and that is that even though this has not been arbitraged away, so even though it has a very good reason to exist, there has to be an opportunity in there for us somewhere. This is the opportunistic side of my personality coming out. Okay, so there has to be an opportunity in there for us somewhere. If the people in front of us, whether it's us as solopreneurs or us as salaried employees, whatever, number of the population is working in the white collar world, let's say 3 million people, or 3 billion people. Does that sound like a pretty realistic estimate?
I have no idea, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's say that for some reason, I don't know, that it's 3 billion people working in the white collar world. It's probably not that at all. It's probably way lower than that. But okay. So anyway, for the 3 billion people working in the white collar world, is there some way to profit off of this opportunity, off of knowing the fact that the people in front of you are just fooling themselves and they're not really as rational as they like to think they are? I don't know.
Well, this can open up a whole plethora of topics like the fallacies or the biases that we have. And I would be more than happy to pick one each episode, because there are tens of them, and put them on the table and actually shed an honest light into how we fool ourselves.
Yeah.
Including you and me, by the way. Let's start with us.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, that you could easily make an episode out of just each one of those.
We could make a whole season.
Yeah, we can make a whole season.
We could make a whole year by that.
We could make a whole year. Yeah, people write books and they dedicate their entire lives to studying just one of them. So, yeah. Okay, so that's good food for thought for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap it up here today, and we didn't even, like, we've been going on so long on this topic that we didn't even get a chance to delve into the topics that you've got on your mind.
We'll do it on the next one.
Yeah, we'll do it on the next one then. So we'll wrap it up for today. So right. So it's good to be back in the saddle, Alper.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you again too. Talk to you later.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.